Stock Compounders? Brad here. So Mohnish Pabrai gave another Q&A session, this one at Indiana University, just on the 1st of April. So we're going to break it down for you today. I'm going to share my highlights. But first, I want to point out Indiana University. This is actually a university that's near and dear to my heart. Both of my parents went to IU back in the 70s. So it was pretty cool that Pabrai gave a talk there. Interesting side note about IU, my dad still watches the college football and basketball games as if Indiana winning is life or death to him, which is fascinating from a psychological perspective to me. But anyway, let's move on to the talk. So the first section I want to talk about, he's asked, how do you narrow down your investment universe, right? There's over 50,000 public companies in the world to choose from. How do you narrow it down to a pool of investment opportunities that you can actually spend some time on? So here's how Pabrai does it. You really have to eliminate large swaths of companies, okay? Is it within your circle of competence? That is going to eliminate many, many companies. Pabrai says 99% of companies are not within his circle of competence. So that's great. Immediately, you can eliminate 99% of public companies. There are entire industries that Pabrai doesn't have any interest in. Not only does he not understand them, he doesn't have any interest in investing in those industries. U.S. healthcare is one of those areas. He says they're not driven by market forces, okay, the players in U.S. healthcare. Defense contractors, most tech names are just too expensive for him, for a cheapskate like Mohnish Pabrai. And I say that in a very endearing way. Here's what he looks at, okay? He looks at Value Investors Club. He says it's a somewhat filtered list. The people who are submitting the write-ups to Value Investors Club have been vetted, okay? And it's a good place to learn. It's a good place to learn how great investors look at businesses and break down the investment thesis of a business. So that's Value Investors Club. That's the first one he mentioned. Second one, Value Line. Pabrai has talked before about using Value Line screeners, like low price to earnings ratio stocks. Third one, Sum Zero. And then the fourth one, he gets several ideas per day emailed to him by people who watch his YouTube videos, people who are in contact with him in one way or another. And we have Pabrai's email address. If you watch the whole talk, I think at the beginning and at the end, he gives his email address. So if you have a great idea, you can send it to Pabrai. His secretary will print that email out, give it to him, and then he'll probably spend 5 seconds looking at it and then toss it, unless it's a 20-cent dollar bill. It's something where there's a huge upside and he understands that industry. So it's a pretty high bar to make it onto Pabrai's portfolio with one of your stock ideas, but that's okay. We don't get any bonus points for doing that. He says the objective when looking at a business is to say no as quickly as possible and move on, which is essentially what I just summarized there. A business should be able to should be able to convince a very deep skeptic that it deserves more time for study, okay? So, and that should be a very high bar. The next section that Pabrai talks about that I want to spend a little time on. So he had dinner with Charlie Munger about a week before he gave this talk on April 1st, 2021. And I guess Charlie Munger, part of what Pabrai and Munger talk about is what businesses are cinches, okay? Is it a cinch, this investment idea, or is it not a cinch? American Express used to be a cinch, says Pabrai. 20 years ago, American Express, it was an obvious bet, right? It is no longer a cinch, and he doesn't get into why that is. Obviously there's been an acceleration of technological change in the industry that American Express is operating in, which, there are stronger forces of change happening there. So perhaps that's why it's not a cinch anymore. And he says a cinch means that the odds that something will destroy that business are infinitesimally small. Okay, that's what a cinch is. You've got a very strong moat for a business. Once Charlie says something is a cinch, if it's sitting at a cheap price, all I have to do is back up the truck. That's what Pabrai says. So Pabrai, I don't think Pabrai, will directly clone very many people. But Charlie Munger, you look at this image here. That's Charlie Munger back there, the bronze statue. Charlie Munger is Pabrai's number one role model, number one guru. So, it gets me curious. Pabrai didn't mention Alibaba at all in this talk, but clearly, Munger pulled the trigger on Alibaba pretty recently. And there's been speculation about whether Pabrai will follow Charlie Munger into that investment. It'll be very interesting to watch. It's possible that Pabrai didn't find out that Charlie was buying Alibaba until earlier this month when that 13F was released. So we may not see it, even if Pabrai did buy it, until the next round of 13Fs in August, middle of August. What else? With long-term compounders, you need to get as close as possible to cinch status. Okay, that's really the goal with these long-term compounders, these businesses that we're going to hold for decades. Okay, if it's not a cinch, there's a lot of opportunity cost in, holding a company that long. So it pays to have that cinch conviction. Costco is a cinch. Munger didn't explicitly say that to Pabrai, but if Pabrai had to guess how Charlie Munger feels about Costco, Charlie Munger would likely say Costco is a cinch. And Costco is actually a company that's on my watch list. And honestly, if it gets back down to where it was, I think just a month ago or so, $310 per share, around there, I'm probably going to start initiating a position into Costco. I wouldn't back up the truck at that price, but it's a business. I understand it. I'm a customer at Costco. I pay them money every year for annual membership dues. I really like going there, which is weird because it's a warehouse. There's nothing really fun about, the design of Costco warehouses. I think it's the cheapskate in me. It's knowing that I'm getting the best deals on the products that I buy at Costco that really makes me feel like a kid in a candy shop when I go there. So 3 new questions that Pabrai added to his checklist that has like 170 questions. The first question, is the business a cinch, right? Is it a cinch? Second, is this a business that can be run with feet on the desk? Okay, which is kind of a funny way to think about it. Pabrai, he talks about visiting a business where the CFO has his feet on the desk, right? It doesn't seem like he has anything to do. And he talks about how that's actually a great thing. Because if you're running a business in a way that you're able to kind of relax and have your feet on the desk and you can stay in business, that is a strong business. That's the point that Pabrai is trying to make here. A business that can basically run itself, where you don't need an outstanding management team to operate this thing. And then the third question he added, what is the destination? Okay, what does this business look like in 2 or 3 decades from now? And then he goes on to say, I have 2 businesses. So Pabrai owns 2 businesses that are cinches and feet on the desk type status for those 2 businesses. He doesn't mention what those are. I'm going to venture to guess that they are Shinnikin out of Japan and Racist Logistics out of Turkey. If I had to guess, I would guess those are the 2 cinches that he has in his portfolio. If you have other ideas, let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear from you guys on that. But I'm fairly confident that those are the 2 that he's talking about as cinches. Okay, so those are the 2 kind of chunks that I wanted to talk about. Now we're just going to go quickly through some bullet points from the talk. He was asked about diversification. He says diversification is overrated. Some of the best investors of all time have been the product of zero diversification. They've been owners of businesses. You've got the Waltons, right? You've got Bill Gates with Microsoft. There's, many case studies of great businesses where the person running it, that was their entire net worth in that one business. And they did incredibly well. And this is a shift that Pabrai had recently reading Nick Sleep, to really think about owning the whole business when you're an investor, and to think about buy and sell decisions, primarily sell decisions, as an owner of the entire business. And I really like that shift. I resonate with that shift. He talks about Frontline. He spent 14 minutes of this hour-and-a-half talk talking about Frontline, kind of giving a case study for Frontline, which owns VLCCs, very large crude carriers. He was able to capture a double in Frontline, but he missed out on a 30x. Okay, so again, that reinforces, don't be so quick to be in and out of these companies. Really try to spend the time, dedicate the work to finding these long-term compounders, and let the business compound your money for you. The doubles aren't where it's at in terms of getting to the promised land. It's really compounding over time that's going to get us there. He talks about diversification in terms of both Pabrai funds and his personal investment accounts. So for Pabrai funds, he likes to have 10% allocations. Okay, he'd like to have 10 different companies at a 10% at cost for each one. That's kind of the ideal for Pabrai funds. Now, in his own portfolio, he says he rarely has more than 3 stocks. And a lot of the time, he just has 1 stock, okay? Which is kind of crazy to me, to be honest. And he even says most people wouldn't be able to sleep well at night in that situation if they had all of their personal investment in 1 stock. And it's a little weird to me. It's a little, I'm not quite sure what to make of it, because Pabrai talks about how, even the best investors are going to be wrong maybe 40% of the time, 30 to 40% of the time. Even if you know everything you think there is to know about a business, something can go wrong, right? That investment can turn south. So it surprises me that he would have just 1 in his personal portfolio. But that's what he does. Charlie Munger talks about having 3. He thinks 3 provides enough diversification in a portfolio. And Munger has talked about how he really just owns 3 stocks in his family's portfolio. three investments: Berkshire Hathaway, Costco, and a stake in Lilu's Himalaya Capital. Okay, so again, surprising that Pabrai would at any point just have one stock, but I guess that's the case quite often in his personal portfolio. For the fund, he mentions he's unwilling to cut positions back. Okay, so say it's a 10% bet initially. He's had situations where two stocks make up 70% of the portfolio. Okay, and he's not willing to cut those back in order to get things into balance. And really, the reason for that: don't cut the flowers to water the weeds. All right. If something grows to be a big chunk of the portfolio, maybe it deserves to have a big part of the portfolio, right? Because it's grown into that on its own. So there could be something there with the business, and if the business is getting better, let it ride. That's really how Pabrai views that, and it makes a ton of sense to me. He was asked about why he does so much investing overseas. Is the U.S. just a really efficient market, and some of these emerging markets aren't as efficient, and that's why we can find opportunities? He said, well, no. The U.S. market is just as inefficient. It just so happens at present the inefficiencies in the U.S. market are showing up as overpriced securities in different kind of areas of the U.S. market, like tech, for example. In the future, we're going to see plenty of inefficiencies on the bargain side in the U.S. markets. Okay, that's going to come back. It always does, and it always will. It's not that the U.S. market has gotten more efficient. So, I liked how he framed that. So that's great. More bargains to come in the U.S. market. We just don't know when. He talks about shorting, right? There's been a lot of press about shorting stocks in the news recently with what happened with GameStop and others. Pabrai, we know, those of us who follow Pabrai, thou shalt not short, okay? One of the 10 commandments. And he got a little bit more into that. He says the issue with shorting is that you need to be right, not just on direction. So you need to be right that the stock is going down. You also need to be right on timing, okay? So the beautiful thing about going long on a company without leverage, without any stuff like that, is we can wait. We can wait for the market to properly see the opportunity in the business that we're investing in. Time is on our side. When it comes to shorting, time is not on our side, okay? We need the market to reprice that downward somewhat quickly, okay? So we've got to be right on two things, which is so much harder than just having to be right on the direction if we're just going long on companies. So I really like how he framed that, to be right on just one thing versus having to be right on two things with the clock ticking. Let's see. And here's another great point. When you're short, you need to constantly pay attention to the positions that you're short on. So there's this mental bandwidth that consumes. Pabrai, he has somewhere between 8 and 10 positions. And he can go for weeks or months without looking at those positions, okay? Because he's a business owner, right? He bought because it was a compelling opportunity from a business perspective. So that gives him a lot of freedom to spend his time learning, studying new investment opportunities, learning new industries. He doesn't have to be constantly tethered to what's happened today or this week in his stock portfolio. And I think that's a really important consideration. It's one of the reasons I kind of pulled back from SPACs a little bit, even though it was compelling. It still is. The potential upside to downside situations with some SPACs out there, it's too much of a short-term game for my temperament, and it was taking up a lot of mental bandwidth to constantly be tracking these SPACs in the short term. It's just not how I want to be spending my time. So that was a great reminder there. He was asked, how long do you usually hold a stock? Okay. And I like what he talked about, Michael Phelps' book, 100 to 1 in the stock market. And he said, every sell decision is an admission of an investing mistake. Okay. And this is really taking that long-term compounder approach to a portfolio. So if you buy a company thinking you're going to hold it for a decade or two, if you don't hold it for a decade or two, you sell it, you're saying, oh, I was wrong. This isn't a long-term compounder. So it's time to get out. It's an admission of a mistake. And I like that framework for it. And what does this business look like in 10 or 20 years? Okay, that's what Pabrai asks himself now versus, is this a dollar bill that I can buy for 50 cents or 25 cents? What does the business look like in 10 or 20 years? And how high is my conviction that I can have any degree of confidence in what the business will look like in a decade or two from now? And the Holy Grail, here's the Holy Grail for Pabrai right now, to find compounders where the rest of the world doesn't yet see them as compounders, and then sit on your butt, okay? Sit on your hands, watch the paint on the wall dry as this business makes you rich, as this business brings you that much closer to being financially free. And then just two more here. So he was asked about his investing checklist. So the investment checklist, it really just comes from studying how great investors lost money. This is something that Pabrai did, I think it was right after the global financial crisis in 2008. He hired some interns and he said, go out and find the investment mistakes from these great investors. And we need to figure out if those mistakes could have potentially been identified before that investor made that investment. And that's really what went into building out the investment checklist. To try to, before you make an investment, ask yourself, okay, here's all these mistakes that great investors have made in the past. Am I making any of these mistakes with this new investment opportunity? So it's a way to just try to avoid those mistakes that can be caught beforehand. And then lastly, the single most important trait for an investor, he was asked. You guys guess what that is? The single most important trait for an investor is to have extreme patience. Okay? That is such an edge. I think Joel Greenblatt, his most recent book is that's what it is. That's what it's about. It's about using time, using patience to our advantage. Let the magic of compounding work for you by having patience with with the businesses that you own. Too much activity can really hurt portfolio performance. And then he makes a Seinfeld reference, which was awesome. You guys, I used to be fanatical about Seinfeld. I would tape each Seinfeld episode, and I had a whole collection of tapes. I didn't do that with any other show, just Seinfeld. And he referred to this episode where David Puddy and Elaine, they're in a relationship, and they're on a plane, right? And David Puddy is staring at the seat in front of him. And Elaine is sitting next to him, and she's she's got her book out, she's reading, and she's looking over at her boyfriend, David Putty, staring at the seat. And she's like, do you want something to read? Like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? She's looking at him like he's crazy for just staring at the seat in front of him. And it's pretty entertaining. By the end of the flight, they're broken up, and it's a funny, it just points out this difference between, in a sense, between men and women, but also this great quality that David Putty has to be a value investor, right? To be able to just sit and look and not do anything. Quality of great investors. So anyway, guys, that is the most recent Q&A from Mohnish Pabrai, my highlights. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what your favorite takeaways were from this latest Pabrai talk. And keep it going, Pabrai. Keep it going every month. It's awesome to see these talks so frequently over the last 6 months. So we'll end it there. I will see you all in the next video. Take care.